We need to talk about men's violence against women. Seriously. Did you know that about half of all women who were victims of homicide were killed by a spouse or former spouse or family member? While it's true that more men are victims of murder than women, did you know that while men are usually killed by other men, women are almost always murdered by men? Did you know that a woman's chances of being harmed or killed increases when she attempts to leave a relationship or has recently left a relationship with a man? Before you nod all men me, this isn't a video about which gender experiences death or violence at greater numbers. This is about the very specific and distinct form of gendered violence experienced by women because we are women. Let's talk about it. Every 2.5 days in Canada, a woman or girl is killed. There's a name for this kind of violence. It's called femicide. Femicide is defined as the intentional killing of women and girls because they are female by men. And in Canada, a woman is killed by a current or former partner every 6 days. There's a name for this too. It's called intimate partner femicide. No matter where you look in the world, femicide, and more specifically, intimate partner femicide, is an issue. Last July, a certain kind of confusing social media challenge briefly took over Instagram feeds. You're forgiven if you don't remember. It was a very long year. #ChallengeAccepted saw celebrity women sharing the hashtag under a black and white photo of themselves and tagging other women to do the same. The point wasn't immediately clear, to me at least, and honestly the point may have been lost long before the campaign went viral, but thanks to the work of a few writers and journalists, we now know that the #ChallengeAccepted campaign didn't begin as a pointless vanity campaign. The Challenge Accepted hashtag originated in part as a tool to raise awareness around social issues. And one of the issues that this hashtag was used to draw awareness to is femicide in Turkey, where about 474 women were killed in 2019 by a partner or relative, and 120 more women were killed by the time the campaign went viral. While this celebrity iteration of the #ChallengeAccepted campaign bungled its women's empowerment message, it did for a brief second, again thanks to writers who helped recenter the message, bring into focus this issue of gender-based violence, an issue that is actually cause for concern for all of us, no matter your nationality. As North Americans, we like to think that this is some sort of an issue specific to Turkish culture or an issue elsewhere, but of course this isn't the case. In recent weeks, a male gunman went on a shooting rampage in Atlanta. Robert Aaron Long took the lives of 8 people, including 6 women of Asian descent. Robert Aaron Long later told police that sexual frustration led him to commit this shooting spree. Helping to explain away the xenophobic attack motivated by his resentment towards women, and also demonstrating the normalization of violence against women in society, Officer Jay Baker of the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office famously told the media in a press conference that the killer was just having a really bad day.
He was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope, and yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did.
In Canada, just last year, another male committed a killing spree. Over the course of 2 days, Gabriel Wortman went on a shooting and arson spree that left 22 people dead, 13 of whom were women, and left 3 other people injured in one of the worst mass killings in Canada in recent years. Before Gabriel Wortman went on his violent rampage, there had been reports to police going back as far as 2013, and according to a neighbor, she made reports as far back as 2005 concerning the physical abuse he committed against his girlfriend and his possession of numerous illegal weapons. Nothing had been done. One of the first victims of Gabriel Wortman's 2-day killing spree included his girlfriend, which appears to me like his violent behavior was allowed to escalate over the years until he took his violent outburst out on the city. What do the Nova Scotia killings and the issue of femicide in Turkey have in common? They are both examples of a cultural undercurrent of normalized violence against women that is costing women and children around the world their lives, and more troublingly, at the hands of people they know and trust. The problem of intimate femicide is so bad that a report released by the CDC in recent years has found that one of the leading causes of death for women and girls between the ages of 1 and 44 is homicide. And according to femicidecanada.ca, globally, women are much more likely than men to be assaulted, raped, or killed by a current or former partner. In a global study, the United Nations reported that about 87,000 women were killed in 2017. More than half of these women were killed by spouses or family members. And I think it's important to include that about 15% of women who were killed by intimate partners were pregnant. In fact, studies have shown that murder is one of the top causes of death for pregnant women. A report on family violence outlines just how widespread the problem of family and spousal abuse is in Canada. This report found that about 760,000 Canadians over 15 years old have experienced spousal conflict, abuse, violence in the past 5 years. 4.2 million Canadians over the age of 15 years old have experienced emotional abuse from a spouse or partner. 900,000 or 3% of Canadians over 15 years old have experienced financial abuse by a spouse or partner. And in Ontario and Quebec, 1 in 6 women and 6% of men have experienced physical abuse by a family member. That was in 2016. The rates of domestic violence spiked through the global pandemic. There was a reported 30% increase in violence against women globally, while intimate partner violence and femicide have also increased. Stay-at-home orders and strict quarantine guidelines were and are, of course, necessary to slow the spread of COVID. But for people living with abusive partners, especially during this time, the risk of harm increased. And with loss of jobs meant that not only were people stuck in their homes with their abusive partners, but they or their partners, or both, found themselves out of work and at home for periods far longer than the usual after-work hours, which meant opportunities to leave abusive relationships decreased while stress increased. Which could explain why shelters for battered women in some parts of Canada saw calls for spaces decrease. In an interview with the New York Times, sociologist Marianne Hester, who studies abusive relationships, pointed out that domestic violence goes up whenever families spend more time together. Pre-COVID, these times included Christmas breaks and summer vacation periods. Scholars also find that times of stress, particularly financial, and crisis can also escalate abuse. And this is not an anti-lockdown PSA, by the way. Lockdown orders didn't create a crisis of femicide. That already existed. And lifting lockdown mandates and stay-at-home orders amid the global pandemic doesn't mean the issue suddenly goes away. In an article for the Globe and Mail, columnist and author Elizabeth Renzetti wrote that femicides are treated as unrelated incidents, flare-ups of violence that have nothing to do with each other, instead of systems of failure that can be fixed with effort. If we as a society continue to treat femicide and all forms of violence against women as private domestic issues, and not the result of the intricate ways sexism colludes to prevent women from being valued and able to protect themselves and their families, then the issue will never be solved. The CDC reported that men's violence against women should be thought of as a health issue, and homicide as, quote, the most severe health outcome of violence against women. Thanks to the cultural phenomenon that is the #MeToo movement, stories about gendered harassment and violence are discussed more seriously, in some cases, and some people have even suffered the consequences of their actions. But contrary to what a lot of sexists will have you believe, that doesn't mean women are suddenly safe. In many parts of the world, there are actual laws in place that prevent women in many forms from living as full or equal members of society. There are laws and societal beliefs held in places around the world that victimize women, compromise their safety, and permit substantial harms against them. While Canada may have policies in place to theoretically protect victims of gendered abuse, these laws don't ensure all women's safety, like women who don't feel safe enough to even report their abusers and access any protections under the law, for example. And these policies alone don't work to offset the various systems in place throughout patriarchal societies, including in Canada, which target and negatively impact women because we are women. And the sexist social beliefs I just spoke about don't just exist in countries overseas. Let's talk about how we think about men's violence against women. Men's violence against women in Canada and the US is a really big issue that seems to exist in plain sight, while at the same time it's ignored. Our beliefs about how little we value women isn't just some latent implicit bias held by a handful of misogynists. These beliefs are present in every place people exist in society, and these beliefs even saturate the media, TV, books, and film we consume which go on to reproduce and perpetuate the sexist values of our society. These messages teach us about ourselves and how to treat and think about, or not think about, other people. Men's violence against women isn't always portrayed in films and television looking like this, where the plot of the film revolves around a once battered woman fleeing her abuser and even ending the torment once and for all. Sometimes how we think about men's violence in our society looks like this.
I'm not fucking letting you near my kids.
You don't think I'm gonna see my fucking kids again, huh?
Don't you fucking touch them.
Don't you fucking touch me!
I can get a piece of ass anytime I want. Shit, I got Carol in the bedroom right now, passed out cold. I could violate her 10 different ways if I wanted to.
What are you waiting for?
I don't know.
Sometimes abuse is even romanticized in our culture. On a song about two people describing how passionately in love they are by a married couple, Jay-Z drops this line.
I'm Ike. Turn up, baby, no, I don't play. Now eat the cake, anime, said eat the cake, anime.
This is a reference to a scene in the biographical film What's Love Got to Do with It, which dramatizes the beginning of Tina Turner's career and her marriage to Ike Turner. Tina Turner has been candid throughout her life, even when she didn't want to be, about the abuse she suffered at the hands of Ike Turner. And the scene Jay-Z references is one in which Angela Bassett, as Tina Turner, is demeaned by her husband in a consistent series of abusive attacks. We can also look at this song to understand how we think about men's violence against women in our society.
She may contain the urge to run away, but hold her down with soggy clothes and breeze blows. Cetirizine, your fevers greet me again. Never kisses, or do you ever send a full stop? Do you know where the waffles go? They go along to take your honey. Bring down our sleep, build a breakfast, now let's eat my love, love, love. She bruises calls, she splutters pistol shots. Hold her down with soggy clothes and breeze blows. She's morphine, queen of my vaccine, my love, love, love. She may contain the urge to run away, but hold her down with soggy clothes and breeze blocks. Germaline, disinfect the scene, my love, love, love. But please don't go, I love you so, my lovely.
Just a catchy song about a guy restraining and killing a woman because he just loves her so much. We can even look to Disney films to understand how we think about men's violence against women in our culture. Violence against women and girls is so ubiquitous in film and television, it's everywhere you look. Normalized violence against women in film and TV is so insidious because it's there even if you aren't looking. And if you're not aware of how problematic the depictions are, we can take for granted the messages we're learning and internalizing and are reproduced in our everyday lives. For example, what do you think the premise of a movie like Beauty and the Beast teaches young girls about romance, relationships, and self-worth?
Take me instead.
You would take his place?
Belle, no! You don't know what you're doing!
If I did, would you let him go?
Yes. But you must promise to stay here forever.
You have my word.
Done!
No, Belle, listen to me. I'm old. I've lived my life.
Wait.
Belle!
Wait! There's something sweet and almost kind, but he was mean and he was coarse and unrefined, and now he's dear and so unsure. I wonder why I didn't see it there before.
Of course, a person doesn't become a victim of violence because they grew up on Disney movies. What I'm saying is that the media we consume plays a massive role in propagating messages about the values of a society. And these messages include diluting the signs of dysfunction and violence and depicting aggression and hostility not as the red flags that they are, but as signs of passion and bravery, and even something women find attractive. With this, we really have to consider what film and television and broader society tell us, not just about how much or how little we value women's lives and our safety, but also about what these messages tell us about manhood and how men are taught to express masculinity, and what this all means for global societies in which women and children are harmed and killed at endemic rates. Simply, I'm not saying that the media alone is doing just one thing, and that's perhaps priming women to accept abuse. Our media points to a culture that isn't bothered by violent treatment of women, so not bothered that male protagonists sometimes exhibit some of the violent behaviors they use to protect or even win over female love interests in their interactions with love interests. Like in this scene from the popular film True Romance.
What the fuck you crying for, huh? Huh? I mean, Christ, he's not worth one of your tears. Would you rather have been me? Is that it? Huh? Is that what you want? I mean, do you love him? Do you love him? I said, do you fucking love him? Huh?
I think what you did was...
What?
I think what you did...
What?
...was so romantic.
This film was written by Quentin Gratuitous N-word use Tarantino, who just loves to have women beaten up and murdered in his films. Sometimes the violence against women we consume isn't fictional. When the abuse Canadian rapper Tory Lanez committed against rapper Megan Thee Stallion started circulating last year, I started thinking about how women who are victims of violence are treated in the media and by the public. Women before and women since those reports. For example, in the many articles I read about the serious assault Megan Thee Stallion suffered at the hands of Tory Lanez, and the reports I've read after footage circulated of rapper Quavo pushing and shoving his then-girlfriend Saweetie, also a musical artist, was seen knocked to the ground, then later limping out of the elevator, descriptions of these attacks in media reports included words like disagreement, quarrel turned fight, altercation between the couple, dispute. One of the outlets even wrote the 27-year-old appears to swing at Quavo and pick up an orange case outside of an elevator in the clip. Author and academic Nancy Burns refers to this use of language as an example of degendering the problem and gendering the blame, where the seriousness of violence against women is obscured and the attacks are framed as just a disagreement in which both sides bear equal responsibility, even the victim. And very few articles, if any, included in their accounts the fact that these are not isolated incidents that are out of the ordinary in our culture, but example of the very common issue of violence experienced by women by their spouse. Then there's the way we, the public, treat victims of abuse. Now with social media, news outlets don't have the only say on reports. Survivors don't just suffer the trauma of being attacked and nearly killed by a person they cared for. They endure the scrutiny of media, and they endure the criticisms of millions of people. Their trauma sometimes becomes a punchline, for lack of a better word. Their trauma in our social media world is sometimes memified. And if this isn't bad enough, people get to question whether or not the traumatic event happened at all, whether a survivor deserved it, and that they don't care or would have done the same in full view of the person experiencing some of the worst moments of their lives, publicly. And people get to make these claims in full view of other survivors. And if the media and the public consciousness all reinforce the idea that men's violence against women isn't the widespread issue that it is, that men are not harming their spouses at alarming rates, and that gendered violence isn't a crisis, then continued efforts to frame this particular issue as a normal part of our society can, as Nancy Burns writes, jeopardize funding for programs that help domestic violence and misguide programs and resources directed at prevention. Degendering the problem while gendering the blame diverts attention from men's responsibility and the cultural and structural factors that oppress women and foster violence. It is easier to sell sensationalized stories rather than writing about male power and everyday sexism. So the issue of femicide goes away when our society and societies around the world value women, not just our labor, but our lives. So we need to start believing survivors. We need to start caring about how women are treated, no matter how credentialed the perpetrator is, how successful the perpetrator or the victims are, we need to care and act even if the perpetrator may have been nice to you. You need to care and act no matter how innocuous they appear to you, and you need to care and act even if the perpetrator is your friend. If you really feel like you can't speak out right now, there are other things you can do. You can still extend help to someone in crisis by privately reaching out to them or looking up resources to safely do that. You can work on recognizing and addressing toxic masculinity. You can stand behind calls to improve women's safety in society no matter where they are, whether at home or at work. And if you need more convincing, if we don't as a society find and invest in ways to respond rapidly and effectively to early occurrences of domestic abuse, women's lives and the lives of children and entire communities will continue to hang in the balance. Because as we've seen in the many mass killings over the past few decades, gun-wielding men, fueled by their hate for women, resulted in acts of terror and many lives lost. It's time we create societies in which women, including and especially trans women, women with disabilities, women of color, especially Black women and Indigenous women, who endure the highest rates of violence, can support themselves, their families, and thrive as equally valued members of our society, rather than victims of cycles of poverty and abuse, where women and mothers are left few options outside of staying with their abusers or continuing to lead lives on college campuses or in work environments, homes, and communities where harassment and even abuse is a normal part of life. We need to help create societies where men's violence against women in any context isn't treated as a private matter to which we all turn a blind eye or laugh at or enjoy as entertainment. We need to stop thinking of men's violence against women as a women's issue. It is your issue, it is my issue, it is every single one of ours.